The harsh autumn wind carried ash and embers into the sky as Yates Holloway stood motionless, watching the last of his life's work crumble into charred ruins. The ranch house he'd built with his own hands 7 years ago now lay in smoldering heaps before him, black smoke billowing upward in stark contrast to the clear Montana sky. His weathered face, usually stoic and unreadable, now betrayed a flicker of devastation as he turned away from the destruction, shoulders slumped under the weight of his loss. Rebecca Kincaid watched from the edge of what remained of the fence line, her heart breaking for the man she'd come to admire from afar. She'd ridden out from Bentonville at the first sign of smoke on the horizon, hoping against hope that it wasn't Holloway's place. But fate had other plans. It was 1878, and life in Montana Territory was unforgiving at best. Yates had come west after the war, like so many others, looking to build something that was truly his own. At 32, he'd managed to create a respectable cattle operation out of nothing but determination and grit. And now it was gone. Rebecca, 26 and unwed, ran the town's only dress shop, having moved west 3 years prior after the death of her parents in Baltimore. She'd noticed the tall, quiet rancher on his monthly trips to town for supplies. Their conversations had never extended beyond polite greetings, but she'd felt drawn to the sadness behind his eyes that matched her own. "Mr. Holloway," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard as he began to saddle his horse. He didn't turn, his hands working methodically at the cinch. Rebecca gathered her courage and approached closer. "Mr. Holloway," she tried again. This time he paused, his broad shoulders tense beneath his soot-stained shirt. "Miss Kincaid," he acknowledged without turning. "This ain't a good time for social calls." "I saw the smoke," she said, stopping a respectful distance away. "The whole town did. I came to see if I could help." Yates finally turned, his hazel eyes red rimmed from smoke and unshed tears. "Nothing to help with, it's gone." His voice was flat, devoid of the emotion that surely churned inside him. Rebecca watched as he secured his few remaining possessions to his saddle, a bedroll, canteen, and small sack that likely contained what little he'd managed to save from the fire. His rifle was already secured in its scabbard. "Where will you go?" she asked, taking another step forward. "Don't rightly know," he replied, checking the cinch one last time. "Might head north toward Helena. Start over." There was no conviction in his voice, just resignation. Rebecca felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. This man who'd worked so hard, who'd built something from nothing, was about to walk away. Something inside her couldn't bear it. Yates swung up into the saddle, adjusting his hat against the sun. He gave one final look at the smoldering remains of his home, his life for the past 7 years, before turning his horse away. "You'll build again," Rebecca said firmly, stepping into his path. Her blue eyes met his with an intensity that momentarily startled him. "Madam." "You'll build again," she repeated. "Right here, this is your land, Mr. Holloway, your home." A ghost of a bitter smile touched his lips. "Nothing left to build with, Miss Kincaid, and winter's coming." "The town will help," she insisted. "We take care of our own in Bentonville." "I appreciate the sentiment," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "but I've never been one for charity." Rebecca squared her shoulders. "It's not charity to help a neighbor, it's what decent folk do." She gestured at the burned remains. "What happened here anyway? Lightning." Yates's jaw tightened. "No, madam, someone wanted me gone." His eyes hardened as he looked past her toward the distant hills. "And they nearly succeeded." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Who would do such a thing? Got my suspicions," he said grimly. "Whitcomb's been wanting this land since I homesteaded it. Controls the water rights upstream. Figures if he gets me out, he can expand his operation." "Theodore Whitcomb?" Rebecca's eyes widened. "The cattle baron," Yates nodded, his expression dark. "The very same. Man thinks he owns half the territory." "All the more reason not to let him win," Rebecca said firmly. "If you leave, he gets exactly what he wants." For a moment, something flickered in Yates's eyes, a spark of the determination that had brought him west in the first place. But it faded quickly, replaced by weariness. "Miss Kincaid, I appreciate your concern, but this is my problem, not yours." Rebecca surprised herself with her next words. "I'm making it mine, Mr. Holloway." She reached out and took hold of his horse's bridle. "At least come back to town. Take a night to think on it. You're in no state to be making decisions right now." Yates looked down at her, truly seeing her perhaps for the first time. Her auburn hair was coming loose from its pins and there was a smudge of ash on her cheek, but her eyes were clear and determined. Something inside him responded to that determination, even as another part wanted to ride away and never look back. "One night," he conceded finally, "but I ain't making no promises beyond that." Rebecca nodded, relief washing over her. "It was a start. That's all I ask, Mr. Holloway." As they rode toward Bentonville side by side, Rebecca stole glances at the man beside her. His profile was strong, his jaw set in a hard line. She wondered what had made her so bold, what had compelled her to insert herself into this man's tragedy. She'd always been practical, not given to impulsive actions. But something about seeing Yates Holloway ready to abandon everything he'd built had struck a chord deep within her. Perhaps it was because she recognized the look in his eyes, the same look she'd seen in her own reflection after her parents died. The look of someone who'd lost their anchor in the world. The main street of Bentonville came into view as they crested a small rise. The town wasn't much a single street with wooden buildings on either side, a church steeple rising at the far end. But it was home now to both of them in different ways. "Sheriff should know about this," Rebecca said as they approached the town limits. "If Whitcomb's behind it, there should be consequences." Yates gave a humorless laugh. "Sheriff Wilson's in Whitcomb's pocket, same as the mayor and half the town council. Law doesn't mean much when the man with the most money makes it." Rebecca frowned. "That may be so, but we still need to report it." They rode in silence down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. It wasn't often that Rebecca Kincaid was seen in the company of the solitary rancher, especially looking as disheveled as they both did. "Miss Kincaid," called Martha Peterson from the doorway of the general store. "Is everything all right?" Rebecca reined her horse to a stop. "Mr. Holloway's ranch was burned to the ground, Martha. I suspect it was deliberate." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Good heavens, are you hurt, Mr. Holloway?" Yates shook his head slightly. "Just the house and barn, lost most of my stock, though. He'll be staying at the boarding house tonight," Rebecca continued, ignoring Yates's sharp look. "And tomorrow we're going to figure out how to help him rebuild." "Of course," Martha nodded. "I'll tell my Henry. He's good with a hammer, as you know." "Much obliged," Yates muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. They continued down the street to Widow Clayton's boarding house, a two-story white clapboard building with a wide front porch. Rebecca dismounted first, tying her horse to the hitching post. "I didn't agree to any rebuilding plans, Miss Kincaid," Yates said quietly as he swung down from his saddle. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "No, you didn't, but you agreed to stay the night and think on it. That's a start." The door to the boarding house opened, and Ethel Clayton emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Rebecca Kincaid, you look like you've been rolling in a fireplace," she said by way of greeting. Her eyes shifted to Yates. "And you look worse, Mr. Holloway." "Mrs. Clayton," Rebecca stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway's ranch burned down today. He needs a room for the night." Ethel's expression softened. "Of course he does. Come in, both of you. I've just put on a pot of stew." Yates hesitated, looking back toward the livery stable. "Need to see to my horse first." "I'll take care of it," came a voice from behind them. They turned to find Jonah Williams, the blacksmith's son, approaching. "Heard what happened from Mrs. Peterson." "I'll make sure your horse is well looked after, Mr. Holloway." Before Yates could protest, Jonah had taken the reins and was leading the animal away. Rebecca placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let people help, Mr. Holloway, just for today." Something in her tone, or perhaps in the warmth of her hand on his arm, seemed to reach him. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight going out of him. "Just for today," he echoed and followed her into the boarding house. The interior was warm and smelled of cooking. Ethel led them to a small parlor off the main hallway, gesturing for them to sit. "I'll fetch some water for washing up," she said. Rebecca, there's a spare dress of yours in the guest room from when you stayed during that spring storm. You might want to change. Rebecca nodded gratefully. She sometimes helped Ethel with sewing projects and had stayed overnight more than once when work kept her late. Once Ethel had bustled away, an awkward silence fell between Rebecca and Yates. He sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, looking entirely out of place in the feminine surroundings. "Why are you doing this?" he asked suddenly. Rebecca, startled by the direct question, took a moment to respond. "Doing what?" "This," he gestured vaguely. "Involving yourself, telling people I'm rebuilding when I haven't decided any such thing." Rebecca smoothed her skirt, buying time to organize her thoughts. "I suppose because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to start over," she said finally. "When my parents died, I was alone. I had to decide whether to stay in Baltimore or make a new beginning. I chose to come west." "That was your choice," Yates pointed out. "Yes, it was, and leaving would be your choice too," she conceded. "But I want you to make that choice for the right reasons, not because you're beaten down by loss or because some bully like Whitcomb scared you off." His eyes flashed. "I ain't scared of Whitcomb." "Then prove it," she challenged softly. "Stay and rebuild, show him he can't run you off your land." Yates studied her for a long moment. "You're an interesting woman, Miss Kincaid." Before she could respond, Ethel returned with a basin of water and clean towels. "Here you are. Rebecca, that dress is laid out upstairs, first door on the right." She turned to Yates. "Mr. Holloway, I've put you in the room at the end of the hall. There's clean water there as well. Supper will be ready in half an hour." As Rebecca made her way upstairs to change, she wondered at her own boldness. She'd never been one to insert herself into others' affairs, yet here she was, practically ordering a man she barely knew to rebuild his life. What was it about Yates Holloway that had prompted such uncharacteristic behavior? Perhaps it was the glimpse of vulnerability she'd seen beneath his stoic exterior. Or maybe it was the injustice of someone like Whitcomb thinking he could burn a man out of his home with no consequences. Whatever the reason, she found herself invested now in Yates Holloway's future. And she was determined that future would include rebuilding what he'd lost right there in Bentonville, where he belonged. The dress Ethel had laid out was one of Rebecca's simpler ones, a deep blue cotton with minimal embellishments. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of her ash-covered clothes. After washing her face and hands and repinning her hair, she felt almost presentable again. When she descended the stairs, she found several townsfolk had gathered in Ethel's dining room. Among them were Henry Peterson from the general store, Doc Miller, and Reverend Simmons. Yates stood awkwardly among them, his hair damp from washing and his face clean of soot, though his clothes were still stained. "Ah, Rebecca," Reverend Simmons greeted her. "We were just telling Mr. Holloway here that we aim to help him rebuild before winter sets in." "That's right," Henry Peterson nodded. "Got plenty of lumber at the store, been saving it for the school expansion, but that can wait till spring." Yates shifted uncomfortably. "I appreciate the offer, but no buts," Doc Miller interrupted. "We take care of our own in Bentonville, always have." Rebecca moved to stand beside Yates. "It's true, Mr. Holloway. When my shop was damaged in last year's storm, everyone pitched in to repair it. I'd have been ruined otherwise." Yates looked down at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I never asked to be one of your own," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Sometimes we don't get to choose our family," she replied just as softly. "Sometimes they choose us." He held her gaze for a long moment, and Rebecca felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the day's exertions. Then he turned back to the assembled townsfolk. "I'm grateful for the offer," he said, his voice gruff, "but I need time to think on it." "Of course," Reverend Simmons nodded, "but know that the offer stands whenever you're ready." Ethel appeared in the doorway then. "Supper's on the table, everyone wash up now." As they moved toward the dining room, Rebecca found herself walking beside Yates. "They mean well," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "It's just not what I'm used to." "What are you used to, Mr. Holloway?" He was silent for a moment. "Being on my own, making my own way." "Even the most solitary wolf sometimes needs a pack," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the metaphor. A ghost of a smile touched Yates's lips. Are you calling me a wolf, Miss Kincaid? Perhaps, she admitted with a small smile of her own. Though a rather tame one, I think. That earned her a soft chuckle, the first she'd heard from him. The sound sent a pleasant warmth through her chest. Supper was a simple but hearty affair: Ethel's beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed around them, with townsfolk sharing news and gossip. Yates remained mostly silent, answering direct questions with minimal words. But Rebecca noticed that he seemed less tense as the meal progressed, the rigid set of his shoulders gradually relaxing. As the evening wound down and people began to take their leave, Sheriff Wilson finally made an appearance. He was a tall man with a bushy mustache and an air of self-importance that Rebecca had always found off-putting. "Holloway," he nodded. "Heard about your place. Shame?" "Yes, it is," Yates replied neutrally. "Any idea how it started?" the sheriff asked, helping himself to a leftover piece of pie. "I have my suspicions." Sheriff Wilson glanced up. "Oh, care to share them? Would it matter if I did?" Yates countered, a hard edge to his voice. The sheriff's expression soured. "Now see here, Holloway." "Sheriff," Rebecca interrupted, "Mr. Holloway has had a trying day." "Perhaps this conversation could wait until morning." Wilson's eyes shifted to Rebecca, narrowing slightly. "Of course, Miss Kincaid, always the peacemaker." He set down his fork. "I'll expect you in my office tomorrow, Holloway, 10 o'clock. After the sheriff departed, only Rebecca, Yates, and Ethel remained in the dining room. Ethel began clearing the dishes, waving away Rebecca's offer to help. "You two go sit in the parlor," she insisted. "I've got this well in hand." In the parlor, Rebecca took a seat on the small sofa while Yates chose to stand by the window, looking out at the darkened street. "The sheriff won't do anything," he said after a moment. "Not if Whitcomb's involved." "You don't know that for certain," Rebecca replied, though she feared he was right. Yates turned to face her. "I've been here long enough to know how things work, Miss Kincaid. Men like Whitcomb don't answer to the law, they buy it. Then we go above the law," Rebecca said. "We write to the territorial governor, or we gather enough townspeople to force the sheriff to act." Yates studied her with something like admiration. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Not when something matters," she said simply. He moved away from the window, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "And this matters to you, my ranch, my problems?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it does." "Why?" The question was direct, his eyes searching hers for answers. Rebecca took a breath, considering her response. "Because what happened to you is wrong. Because no one should be driven from their home by threats and fire. And because—" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "because I think you matter, Mr. Holloway, to this community, and to me." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Yates looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite name. "I hardly know you," he said finally, his voice low. "I know," she acknowledged. "And you hardly know me, but that doesn't mean we can't help each other. That's what community is, isn't it?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "In my experience, Miss Kincaid, people usually want something in return for their help." "And what do you think I want?" she asked. He studied her face. "That's what I haven't figured out yet." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Perhaps I simply want to see justice done, or perhaps I want to see a good man get a fair chance." "Is that how you see me, as a good man?" "I do," she said without hesitation, though a stubborn one. That drew another small smile from him, transforming his face in a way that made Rebecca's heart skip a beat. "I should let you rest," she said, rising from her seat. "It's been a long day." Yates stood as well, his tall frame towering over her. "Yes, it has." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Miss Kincaid, for everything today." "You're welcome, Mr. Holloway." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Will you go to see the sheriff tomorrow?" He nodded. "I will, though I don't expect much to come of it." "I'll go with you," she offered. He looked like he might object, then seemed to think better of it. "If you wish, I do," she said firmly. "Good night, Mr. Holloway." "Good night, Miss Kincaid." As Rebecca walked the short distance to her shop and the small apartment above it, she replayed the day's events in her mind. What had started as an ordinary autumn day had turned into something else entirely. She'd inserted herself into Yates Holloway's life in a way she never could have anticipated, and now, somehow, his problems had become hers. She should feel burdened by this unexpected responsibility, but instead she felt strangely energized. There was something about Yates that called to her his quiet strength, his resilience in the face of adversity. And yes, she admitted to herself, his handsome face in those moments when his guard dropped enough to reveal the man beneath the stoic exterior. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca wondered what the next day would bring. Would Yates decide to rebuild? Would he allow the townsfolk to help? And what of Whitcomb? Would he face any consequences for what he'd done? Whatever happened, Rebecca knew one thing for certain. She was now invested in Yates Holloway's future. And she would do whatever she could to ensure that future included rebuilding his home and his life right here in Bentonville where he belonged. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn day that hinted at the approaching winter. Rebecca dressed with care in one of her better dresses, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair. If they were to face the sheriff and possibly Theodore Whitcomb, she wanted to present a respectable appearance. She arrived at the boarding house just as Yates was coming down the stairs. He'd somehow managed to clean his clothes, though they still showed signs of yesterday's ordeal. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," she said finally. "Miss Kincaid," he nodded. "You didn't have to come." "I said I would," she replied simply. "Shall we have breakfast before we see the sheriff? Ethel keeps a good table." Yates hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose we should." Breakfast was a quiet affair. Ethel served them eggs, bacon, and biscuits, keeping up a steady stream of chatter that required little response from either of them. Rebecca was grateful for the older woman's tact in not questioning them about their plans for the day. As they walked toward the sheriff's office afterward, Rebecca could sense Yates's tension in the rigid set of his shoulders and the tight line of his jaw. "Whatever happens in there," she said quietly, "remember you're not alone in this." He glanced down at her, his expression softening slightly. "I'm not used to that," he admitted. "Perhaps it's time you got used to it," she suggested with a small smile. The sheriff's office was a small building next to the town jail. As they approached, Rebecca noticed Theodore Whitcomb's expensive carriage outside. Her steps faltered. "Whitcomb's already here," she murmured. Yates's face hardened. "Of course he is." They entered to find Sheriff Wilson seated behind his desk, with Theodore Whitcomb occupying a chair across from him. Both men looked up as they entered, surprise registering on their faces at the sight of Rebecca. "Miss Kincaid," Sheriff Wilson frowned, "this is official business." "I'm here to support Mr. Holloway," she replied calmly. As a concerned citizen of Bentonville, Whitcomb rose to his feet. He was a tall man in his 50s, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed Rebecca as if she were livestock at auction. "How charming," he said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "The dressmaker and the rancher, what an unexpected pairing." Rebecca felt Yates stiffen beside her. She placed a subtle hand on his arm, a silent plea for restraint. "Mr. Whitcomb," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "We're here to report a crime. Mr. Holloway's ranch was deliberately burned yesterday." "So I've heard," Whitcomb replied smoothly. "A terrible accident, I'm sure." "It was no accident," Yates said, his voice low and controlled. "Someone rode onto my property while I was checking the north pasture. By the time I saw the smoke and got back, the house and barn were engulfed. Someone wanted me gone." Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat. "That's a serious accusation, Holloway. Do you have any proof?" "Just the fact that Whitcomb here has been trying to run me off my land for the past 3 years, Yates replied. "He's offered to buy me out 5 times, each offer lower than the last. When I wouldn't sell, he diverted the creek that runs through my property, leaving my cattle without water for weeks until I fought him in territorial court." Whitcomb laughed, a sound without humor. "Ancient history, Holloway. We settled that matter legally, as you just said. And now that your legal methods failed, you've resorted to more direct ones," Rebecca interjected. All 3 men turned to look at her with varying degrees of surprise. Whitcomb recovered first, his expression hardening. "You should be careful making accusations you can't support, Miss Kincaid," he said silkily. Slander is a serious matter. So is arson, she countered. Meeting his gaze steadily, Sheriff Wilson stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Now see here, I can't have citizens throwing around accusations without evidence. Mr. Whitcomb is a respected businessman who stands to gain the most from my land being abandoned, Yates interrupted. Sheriff, are you going to investigate this or not? Wilson shifted uneasily. Of course I'll investigate, but without witnesses or evidence, there's not much I can do. Convenient, Rebecca muttered. Whitcomb turned his attention back to Yates. I understand you're upset about losing your homestead, he said, the slight pause making it clear what he thought of Yates's modest ranch. In fact, I'm prepared to offer you compensation. Let's call it $500, enough for you to start fresh somewhere else. Rebecca gasped at the blatant attempt to buy Yates off. She looked up at him, seeing the muscle working in his jaw as he struggled to contain his anger. I'm not selling, Yates said finally. Not to you, not to anyone. That land is mine, legal and proper. For now, Whitcomb said, the threat clear in his tone, but for how long? Without a house, without a barn, winter coming on. How long before reality forces your hand? Mr. Holloway won't be facing winter alone, Rebecca said firmly. The people of Bentonville will help him rebuild. Whitcomb raised an eyebrow. Will they now? How? Communal. He turned back to Yates. My offer stands for 1 week, Holloway. After that, who knows what might happen? Is that another threat? Yates demanded, taking a step forward. Sheriff Wilson quickly moved between them. That's enough. Mr. Whitcomb, I think you've said your piece. Holloway, I'll ride out to your place later today to have a look around, but don't expect miracles. Whitcomb smiled coldly and reached for his hat. Sheriff, Miss Kincaid, he nodded to each before fixing his gaze on Yates. 1 week, Holloway, think about it carefully. With that, he strode out of the office. Once he was gone, Sheriff Wilson sighed heavily. Holloway, I know you and Whitcomb have had your differences, but accusing him of arson is a serious matter. I know what I know, Yates replied. You do your job, Sheriff, that's all I ask. Wilson's expression hardened slightly. I always do my job, Holloway, don't forget that. Outside, Rebecca and Yates walked in silence for several moments, both processing what had just occurred. Finally, Rebecca spoke. He as much as admitted it, she said indignantly. Making that offer, threatening you about what might happen after a week. How can the sheriff ignore that? Yates's expression was grim. Whitcomb owns half the county, including the sheriff. Nothing will come of any investigation. Then we take matters into our own hands, Rebecca said decisively. First, we get you rebuilt before winter, then we find proof of what Whitcomb did. Yates stopped walking and turned to face her. We, he questioned, studying her face intently. Rebecca met his gaze without wavering. Yes, we. Unless you object to my help. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, slowly, his face softened. No, he said finally, I don't object. Those simple words sent a rush of warmth through Rebecca. She smiled up at him. Good. Then our first step is to gather the supplies we'll need. Henry Peterson already offered lumber. We should see him first. As they walked toward the general store, Rebecca felt a curious lightness in her step, despite the seriousness of their situation. There was something about having a purpose, about working together with Yates against a common adversary, that energized her. The general store was busy when they arrived, with several customers browsing the shelves. Henry Peterson looked up from behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw them. Mr. Holloway, Miss Kincaid, just the people I wanted to see. He came around the counter to greet them. I've been talking to some folks about getting that lumber out to your place. Figured we could start with the barn, get your livestock some shelter before we tackle the house. Yates seemed momentarily taken aback by the man's enthusiasm. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate the offer, but I haven't decided yet if you're rebuilding, you'll need more than lumber, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. Nails, tools, roofing materials. Could you put together a list of what we'd need, Mr. Peterson? Already started one, Henry replied, pulling a paper from under the counter. Figured I'd have Jonah and some of the other young men deliver it out to your place tomorrow if that suits. Yates looked from Henry to Rebecca, a mixture of confusion and reluctant gratitude on his face. That's very generous of you. Not at all, Henry waved dismissively. Just being neighborly. Besides, can't let Whitcomb think he can run honest folk off their land. Bad precedent. Rebecca caught Yates's eye. You see, it's not just about you. It's about the whole community standing against bullies like Whitcomb. Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening, a yielding. All right, he said finally. I guess I'm rebuilding. Henry beamed. That's the spirit. Now, about those supplies. As the two men began discussing lumber and nails, Rebecca wandered around the store, making mental notes of other items Yates might need. Blankets, cookware, basic foodstuffs, everything he'd lost in the fire would need to be replaced. She was examining a set of tin plates when Martha Peterson approached her. It's a good thing you're doing, the older woman said quietly, helping Mr. Holloway. Rebecca felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It's nothing special, anyone would do the same. Martha's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. Not everyone would have gone out there when they saw the smoke. Not everyone would be standing beside him now, facing down Theodore Whitcomb. News travels fast, Rebecca observed wryly. It's a small town, Martha replied with a shrug. And Whitcomb making threats isn't exactly something people keep quiet about. She paused, glancing toward where Yates and Henry were still deep in conversation. He's a good man, you know, quiet, keeps to himself, but honest, been through a lot from what I hear. What have you heard? Rebecca asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Martha lowered her voice. Lost his wife and child during the war while he was away fighting. Some say that's why he came west, too many memories back east. Rebecca's heart constricted at this revelation. No wonder Yates kept himself apart, built his life in isolation. He'd already lost everything once before. Don't tell him I told you, Martha added hastily. Men like that, they don't want pity. No, Rebecca agreed softly, they don't. Her gaze drifted back to Yates, seeing him now through a new lens of understanding. The loss, the solitude, the determination to build something of his own, it all made sense now, and it made what Whitcomb had done all the more cruel. When Yates and Henry finished their discussion, Yates seemed different, more resolved, less defeated. He approached Rebecca with a hint of his usual confidence restored. Mr. Peterson says he can have the first delivery of lumber out to my place tomorrow, he said. Seems I'm rebuilding after all, Rebecca smiled. I never doubted it for a moment. His eyes held hers a beat longer than necessary. Didn't you? I sure did. You were in shock, she said gently. Anyone would be, but you're not a man who gives up easily, Mr. Holloway. I could see that from the first. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You saw more than I did then. They left the store together, stepping out into the autumn sunlight. The day had warmed considerably, and Rebecca found herself unwinding the shawl from around her shoulders. What now? Yates asked. Now we need to figure out where you'll stay until the house is rebuilt, Rebecca replied. The boarding house is fine for a night or two, but I'll camp on my land, he interrupted. Done it before when I first arrived, can do it again. Rebecca frowned. Camp in October. Winter will be here before your house is finished. I won't be driven off my land, he said firmly. Not even for a few weeks. If Whitcomb or his men come back, I aim to be there. Rebecca understood his reasoning, even if she didn't like it. At least let me help you get some proper supplies for camping. A good tent, warm bedding. He looked like he might refuse, then nodded. Appreciate that. They spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies: a canvas tent, bedding, cooking equipment, and provisions. Rebecca insisted on contributing to the purchases, overriding Yates's protests. Consider it an investment in Bentonville's future, she told him when he objected to her paying for a heavy wool blanket. The town needs its ranchers, especially the honest ones. By midday, they had accumulated quite a collection of goods. Jonah Williams offered his wagon to transport everything out to Yates's property, an offer they gratefully accepted. As they were loading the last of the supplies, Doc Miller approached them. Holloway, he called. Got a minute? Yates straightened up. Doc, what can I do for you? The doctor, a wiry man in his 60s with spectacles perched on his nose, glanced at the loaded wagon. Heard you're rebuilding. Good decision. He handed Yates a small leather pouch, some medical supplies. Burns, cuts, the usual injuries that come with construction, figured you might need them. Yates accepted the pouch with a nod of thanks. Appreciate it, Doc. I'll ride out in a few days to check on progress, Doc Miller continued. Maybe bring my hammer along. Been a while since I helped raise a barn, but I reckon I still remember how. As the doctor walked away, Yates turned to Rebecca with a bemused expression. Is the whole town planning to help? It seems that way, she replied with a smile. Does that bother you? He considered the question seriously. Would have said yes yesterday. Today, I'm not so sure. He looked around at the bustling Main Street as if seeing it with new eyes. Never thought of this place as home before, just the nearest town. And now, Rebecca prompted gently. Now I'm wondering if maybe I've been missing something, he admitted. His gaze returned to her, warm and considering. Takes a special kind of person to see possibilities where others see only ashes. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm under his regard. I just spoke what I saw, she said simply. And I'm grateful you did, he replied, his voice low and sincere. Not sure I'd have had the heart to start over without someone believing I could. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Jonah called out that the wagon was ready, breaking the spell. I should get these supplies out to my place, Yates said, stepping back slightly. Daylight's burning, Rebecca nodded. Of course, will you come back to town tomorrow to let me know how you're settling in? I will, he promised. And thank you, Miss Kincaid, for everything. As she watched him drive away with Jonah, Rebecca felt a curious mixture of emotions, concern for his safety, pride in his resilience, and something else. Something warm and hopeful that she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. That evening, as Rebecca closed up her dress shop, Martha Peterson stopped by with a basket of baked goods. For Mr. Holloway, she explained. Thought you might want to take these out to him tomorrow. Rebecca accepted the basket with a raised eyebrow. What makes you think I'm going out there tomorrow? Martha's knowing smile returned. Just a hunch. Besides, someone should check on him, make sure he's settled in properly. I'm sure he's fine, Rebecca said, even as she made mental plans to ride out first thing in the morning. He's quite capable. Of course he is, Martha agreed, but everyone needs looking after sometimes, even the most capable of men. After Martha left, Rebecca found herself staring at the basket, wondering when exactly her life had become so intertwined with Yates Holloway's. Just days ago, he'd been a customer who occasionally came to town for supplies, someone she'd admired from afar but barely spoken to. Now she was helping him rebuild his life. It should feel strange, this sudden intimacy. Instead, it felt right, as if she'd been waiting for something to draw them together, some catalyst to bridge the distance between them. That night, as she lay in bed, Rebecca found herself wondering about Yates, if he was comfortable in his tent, if he was thinking about the rebuilding ahead, if he was thinking of her at all. The last thought brought a flush to her cheeks, and she turned over, burying her face in her pillow. Don't be foolish, she murmured to herself. He's just grateful for the help, nothing more. But as sleep claimed her, Rebecca's dreams were filled with hazel eyes and the ghost of a smile that transformed a solemn face into something heartbreakingly handsome. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Rebecca was up with the sun, dressing in practical clothes, a simple brown skirt and sturdy white blouse that wouldn't show dirt. If she was going to help with rebuilding, she needed to be sensibly attired. She packed Martha's basket of baked goods, along with some coffee and other provisions she thought might be useful. Then she made her way to the livery stable, where she arranged to borrow a gentle mare for the day. The ride out to Yates's property took almost an hour. As she crested the final hill, Rebecca could see the remains of the house and barn, blackened timbers stark against the landscape. But there was activity now. Several wagons were already there, men moving about with purpose. Her heart lifted at the sight. As she rode closer, she spotted Yates directing a group of men unloading lumber from a wagon. He'd removed his coat in the morning sun, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms corded with muscle. Rebecca found herself watching the play of those muscles as he lifted a heavy beam and quickly averted her gaze, embarrassed by her own reaction. Jonah Williams was the first to spot her. "Miss Kincaid," he called, waving enthusiastically, "come to help with the rebuilding." At his call, Yates turned. When he saw her, a smile spread across his face, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his features. Rebecca's heart gave a peculiar flutter at the sight. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted, approaching her horse, "didn't expect to see you out here so early." "I brought provisions," she explained, gesturing to her saddlebags and the basket, "and an extra pair of hands if they're needed." Yates helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Always room for another helper," he said, releasing her perhaps a moment later than strictly necessary. "Though I'm not sure barn raising is suitable work for a lady." Rebecca arched an eyebrow at him. "I may be a dressmaker, Mr. Holloway, but I grew up on a farm in Maryland. I know my way around a hammer." His expression registered surprise, then respect. "Is that so? Well then, welcome to the crew, Miss Kincaid." She glanced around at the assembled men: Henry Peterson, Jonah Williams, the blacksmith, and several others she recognized from town. "Quite a turnout," she observed. "More than I expected," Yates admitted. "They just started showing up at dawn. Seems word got around." "That's Bentonville for you," she smiled. "So, what's the plan?" "Barn first," he explained, gesturing toward where the foundation was already being prepared. "Need shelter for livestock before winter. The house will come after." "Makes sense," she nodded. "Where shall I put these provisions?" He led her to where he'd set up his camp, a canvas tent positioned under a large oak tree, a safe distance from the burned-out buildings. A small fire pit had been constructed, with a coffee pot currently sitting among the embers. "It's not much," he said, suddenly seeming self-conscious about his temporary home. "It's practical," she replied, setting down her basket, "and temporary. Soon you'll have a proper roof over your head again." As she arranged the provisions she'd brought, Rebecca was acutely aware of Yates watching her. There was something different in his gaze now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about what you said," he spoke finally. "About building again." She looked up. "Oh, you were right," he said simply. "This is my home, my land. Letting someone like Whitcomb drive me away would be admitting defeat." Rebecca smiled. "I'm glad you see it that way." "It took someone believing in me to make me believe in myself again," he admitted, his voice low. "Thank you for that." Before she could respond, Henry Peterson called out, asking for Yates's help with positioning a support beam. The moment between them broke, but Rebecca carried the warmth of it with her as she joined the work. The day passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca found herself assigned various tasks, helping to measure lumber, fetching tools, and eventually wielding a hammer herself to help secure planking. By midday, the barn's frame was taking shape, rising from the ashes of its predecessor like a phoenix. They broke for lunch, gathering in the shade of Yates's oak tree to share the food various people had brought. The atmosphere was surprisingly festive, with jokes and stories flowing freely. Rebecca observed Yates throughout the meal, noting how he gradually relaxed among these people who had come to his aid, even contributing a dry comment or two that drew appreciative laughter. As the afternoon wore on, more helpers arrived, wives and children of the men who'd come earlier, bringing more food and additional hands for the lighter work. Rebecca found herself working alongside Martha Peterson, attaching hinges to what would become the barn doors. "He keeps looking at you," Martha observed quietly. Rebecca fumbled the nail she was about to hammer. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Holloway," Martha clarified with a small smile. "Every few minutes his eyes find you, check that you're still here." She handed Rebecca another nail. "It's sweet, actually." Rebecca risked a glance in Yates's direction and found that, indeed, he was looking her way. When their eyes met, he didn't look away as she might have expected, but nodded slightly before returning to his conversation with the blacksmith. "He's just making sure everyone is working efficiently," Rebecca said, focusing intently on the hinge before her. Martha's knowing chuckle suggested she thought otherwise, but she didn't press the issue. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the barn's framework stood complete. It was a simple structure, not as large as the original had been, but sturdy and functional. Tomorrow would bring the roof and siding, but for today, everyone agreed it was a job well done. People began to pack up, heading back to town before darkness fell. Rebecca helped clean up the remains of their communal meal, aware that she too should be leaving soon. Yet she found herself reluctant to go. "You've done more than your share today," Yates said, approaching as she folded a tablecloth Martha had brought. "You must be tired." "A bit," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing something worthwhile," he nodded in understanding. "Still, you should head back to town before it gets dark. The trail can be tricky in the twilight." Rebecca glanced at the setting sun. "Yes, I suppose I should." She hesitated, then added, "Will you be all right out here alone?" "I've got my rifle," he assured her, "and I sleep light these days." The reminder of the threat still hanging over him sobered her. "Yates," she said, using his first name without thinking, "please be careful. Whitcomb seems like a dangerous man." If he noticed the shift to his given name, he didn't comment on it. "I will be. Don't worry about me, Rebecca." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, "to help with the roof." "I'll look forward to it," he replied, his voice warm. As he helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering briefly at her waist, Rebecca felt a connection between them that transcended the events that had brought them together. Something was growing here, something as new and promising as the barn frame that now stood where only ashes had been days before. She rode back to town with her mind full of the day's work, and the man she'd left behind, a man who was gradually revealing himself to be so much more than the solitary rancher she'd observed from afar. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Each morning, Rebecca would ride out to Yates's property, sometimes alone, sometimes with other townsfolk. Each day, progress was made, first finishing the barn, then beginning the foundation for the new house. Each evening, she would return to town, tired but fulfilled, already planning her return the next day. Throughout it all, her relationship with Yates evolved, moving from cautious gratitude to genuine friendship and perhaps to something more. They worked side by side, ate together, planned together. She learned his habits, his preferences, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was trying not to smile. He, in turn, seemed to study her just as carefully, noting when she was tired and insisting she rest, bringing her water before she realized she was thirsty. Small gestures, perhaps, but they spoke volumes to Rebecca about the kind of man Yates Holloway truly was beneath his reserved exterior. Theodore Whitcomb made no further appearances during this time, though his shadow loomed over their efforts. Sheriff Wilson rode out once, ostensibly to report on his investigation, which had, predictably, turned up nothing conclusive, but Rebecca suspected his real purpose was to observe their progress and report back to Whitcomb. "His week is almost up," Yates remarked the day after the sheriff's visit. They were taking a break, sitting on a freshly cut log near what would be the front door of the new house. Whitcomb said his offer stood for 1 week. That was 13 days ago. Rebecca handed him a cup of water. "Do you think he'll make good on his threats?" Yates took a drink before answering. "Hard to say. Men like Whitcomb aren't used to being defied, and we've done more than defy him. We've rallied the town against him. That won't sit well." "Yet he's done nothing so far," Rebecca pointed out. "Perhaps he's reconsidering." "Or perhaps he's waiting for the right moment," Yates countered. "I still sleep with my rifle close at hand." Rebecca frowned at the thought of him alone in his tent each night, vulnerable despite his precautions. An idea that had been forming in her mind for days now finally took shape. "Yates," she said carefully, "have you considered staying in town until the house is finished? You could keep your tent here for working days, but return to the boarding house at night." He shook his head. "I need to be here. This is my land." "But Rebecca," he interrupted gently. "I appreciate your concern, but I won't be driven off, not even at night. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I've gotten used to sleeping under canvas. Might feel strange now to have a roof over my head." She sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with him on this point. "At least promise me you'll be careful." "Always am," he assured her. That evening, as Rebecca prepared to leave, a sudden autumn storm blew in from the mountains. Dark clouds rolled across the sky and the wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain. "You can't ride back in this," Yates said as the first heavy drops began to fall. "Storm's moving in fast. Trail will be mud within the hour." Rebecca looked anxiously at the sky. "I can make it if I leave now." "Not worth the risk," he insisted. "You can take shelter in the barn until it passes." As if to emphasize his point, a flash of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder. Rebecca's horse whinnied nervously. "All right," she conceded. "The barn it is." They hurried to stable her horse, the rain now coming down in earnest. By the time they reached the small room they'd built at the back of the barn, intended as a tack room, but currently empty, they were both soaked. "Sorry about this," Yates said, running a hand through his wet hair. "Should have seen the storm coming sooner." Rebecca wrung water from her skirt. "It's not your fault. Weather in these mountains changes quickly." He nodded, then glanced around the bare room. "Wait here, I'll get some dry things from my tent." Before she could protest, he was gone, dashing through the rain to his campsite. Rebecca hugged herself, shivering slightly in her wet clothes. The temperature had dropped with the storm, and the unfinished barn provided only minimal protection from the wind that occasionally gusted through the cracks between boards. Yates returned minutes later carrying a bundle under his coat. "Blankets," he explained, setting them down, "and a dry shirt of mine. It'll be too big, but better than staying in wet clothes." He also produced a small lantern, which he lit, casting a warm glow around the small room. He turned his back politely while Rebecca changed, peeling off her sodden blouse and replacing it with his shirt. It was indeed enormous on her, coming down almost to her knees, but it was dry and carried a scent that was uniquely his, a mixture of pine, wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine. "You can turn around now," she said when she'd finished. She'd spread her wet blouse on a nail protruding from one wall, hoping it might dry somewhat before she needed to wear it again. Yates had changed as well, into a dry shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. He'd spread one of the blankets on the floor and was arranging another as a sort of pillow against the wall. "Not exactly the Bentonville Hotel," he said with a small smile, "but it'll do until the storm passes." Rebecca sat down on the blanket, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Thank you for the shirt and the shelter." He settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Least I could do. You've done far more for me these past weeks." Outside, the storm raged, rain pounding on the new roof they'd completed just days before. Inside, the lantern cast a warm, intimate glow, creating a small haven against the elements. "Roof's holding," Rebecca observed after a particularly loud thunderclap. "You built well." "We built well," he corrected her. "Couldn't have done it without you, without everyone." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm. Rebecca found herself acutely aware of Yates beside her, the sound of his breathing, the warmth emanating from his body, the occasional brush of his arm against hers when he shifted position. "Martha told me about your wife," she said suddenly, the words out before she could reconsider them. "And your child, I'm sorry." Yates went very still beside her. For a moment she thought he might not respond, or worse, that he might be angry at the intrusion into his private grief. "It was a long time ago," he said finally, his voice quiet but not hostile. "Sarah and our son Daniel, influenza took them while I was away fighting. He was only 3. Rebecca's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Yates," he nodded, acknowledgement rather than dismissal of her sympathy. "Is that why you came west?" she asked gently. "To leave the memories behind, partly," he admitted. "After the war, there didn't seem to be anything left for me back east. Figured I'd start fresh where nobody knew me or what I'd lost." He paused, then added, "But you don't really leave grief behind. It comes with you wherever you go." "Yes," Rebecca agreed softly. "I know." He turned to look at her. "Your parents," she nodded, "3 years ago, father first, then mother just a month later. They say she died of pneumonia, but I think it was really a broken heart. They'd been married 30 years. "So you came west to start over too," he observed. "Yes, sold the house, the furniture, everything but what would fit in 2 trunks, bought a ticket west and never looked back." She smiled faintly. Well, perhaps I looked back once or twice. Brave thing to do, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Coming all this way alone. Rebecca shrugged slightly. No braver than what you did. We all find our ways to go on living. Another silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable one, filled with shared understanding. Outside, the storm began to abate, the thunder now distant, the rain gentler on the roof. It'll clear soon, Yates observed. You should be able to ride back before dark. Rebecca nodded, though part of her was reluctant to leave this moment of connection. Yes, I suppose I should. Neither of them moved, however. Instead, Yates turned toward her slightly. Rebecca, he began, then hesitated. These past weeks, having you here. He seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man who, though quiet, was always articulate when he did speak. Yes, she prompted gently. It's meant a great deal to me, he said finally. More than I can properly express, Rebecca smiled. It's meant a great deal to me too. His eyes searched hers, looking for something permission, perhaps, or encouragement. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he leaned forward slowly, giving her ample time to turn away if she wished. She didn't wish to. His lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed as she responded, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, strong and rapid. The kiss deepened, became more certain. Yates's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with exquisite tenderness. When they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster than before. I've been wanting to do that for days, Yates admitted, his voice husky. I've been hoping you would, Rebecca replied with a small smile. He returned her smile, his eyes warm with affection and something more. The storm's passing, he observed, though his gaze never left her face. So it is, she agreed, making no move to leave. In the end, she stayed until the last light faded from the sky, talking with Yates about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their favorite books. When she finally did mount her horse for the ride back to town, it was with his kiss still warm on her lips and a promise to return at first light. As she rode through the cool, rain-washed evening, Rebecca felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her world. What had begun as an impulse to help a neighbor in need had grown into something far more significant, something that made her heart race and her spirit soar. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Theodore Whitcomb's threats, the approaching winter, the uncertainties of life on the frontier, Rebecca knew she would face them alongside Yates. They had found something rare and precious in each other, born from ashes and hardship, but no less beautiful for its difficult beginning. By the time she reached Bentonville, a plan was forming in her mind, a way to protect Yates, to counter Whitcomb's power, and perhaps to secure their future together. The next morning, Rebecca rode out to Yates's property earlier than usual, a saddlebag full of documents at her side. She found him already at work on the house framework, hammering support beams into place alongside Henry Peterson and Jonah Williams. When he saw her approaching, Yates set down his hammer and came to meet her, a smile lighting his face. "You're early," he observed, helping her dismount. "I had an idea I wanted to discuss with you," she explained. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" His expression turned curious, but he nodded. "Of course. Let me tell the others I'll be back shortly." Once he'd spoken with Henry and Jonah, he led Rebecca to a spot near the creek that ran along the edge of his property. It was a peaceful place, with willows trailing their branches in the clear water. "This is lovely," Rebecca remarked, looking around. "I can see why you fought Whitcomb over the water rights. It's the lifeblood of the ranch," Yates agreed. "Without it, the cattle wouldn't survive." He turned to face her. "Now, what's this idea of yours?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about Whitcomb and his threats. About why he wants your land so badly." "The water," Yates said promptly, "controls this creek. You control ranching for miles around." "Exactly," she nodded. "But what if there was a way to ensure he could never control it? What if the water rights were protected permanently?" Yates frowned slightly. "I'm not following." Rebecca reached into her saddlebag and pulled out several folded papers. "I spoke with Judge Harmon this morning. He's in town for circuit court." She handed the papers to Yates. These are legal documents that would establish a water trust. Essentially, you would donate the water rights to the community of Bentonville while retaining full ownership of your land and reasonable use rights for your ranch. Yates looked down at the papers, then back at Rebecca, surprise evident in his expression. A water trust? Yes. Once established, no individual, not even Whitcomb, could ever control or divert the creek. It would be held in trust for all the ranchers and farmers who depend on it. She paused. It would mean giving up some control, but it would also remove the main reason Whitcomb wants your land. He was silent for a long moment, studying the documents. This is unexpected, he said finally. I know it's a big decision, Rebecca acknowledged, and I understand if you want time to think about it. But I believe it could protect not just you, but all the smaller ranchers in the area from Whitcomb's expansion. Yates looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a new intensity. You did this for me, for you, she confirmed, for us, for Bentonville. He stepped closer, taking her hand in his. Rebecca Kincaid, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Does that mean you'll consider it? I'll do more than consider it, he said firmly. I'll sign these papers today. He squeezed her hand gently. When I came west, I wanted land that was mine alone, but these past weeks have taught me the value of community, of being part of something larger than myself. His words warmed her heart. So you'll establish the trust? Yes, he nodded. And then we'll see how Whitcomb responds when he learns his primary motivation for driving me off is gone. Rebecca smiled, relief and happiness flooding through her. I hoped you'd say that. Yates tucked the papers carefully into his pocket, then took both her hands in his. There's something else I've been meaning to say, he began, his voice softening. Something I've been thinking about since yesterday. Rebecca's heart quickened. Yes, I never thought I'd feel this way again, he said, his gaze holding hers. After Sarah died, I figured that part of my life was over, that I'd live out my days alone, and that was just how it would be. He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle patterns on the backs of her hands. But then you followed me from those ashes, told me I'd build again. And somehow, in helping me rebuild my house, you've also helped me rebuild my heart. Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes. Yates, I'm not a man of fancy words, he continued, but I know how I feel. I love you, Rebecca, and if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. I love you too, Yates, she said softly, and yes, I'd like that very much. His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. He leaned down and kissed her, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her close. Rebecca's hands moved to his shoulders, then slid up to touch his face, the stubble on his jaw rough beneath her fingertips. When they parted, both were slightly breathless. We should get back, Yates said, though he made no move to release her. People will talk. Rebecca laughed softly. People already talk. Martha Peterson has been giving me knowing looks for days. Has she now? He chuckled. Well, I suppose we'd better give them something worth talking about. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the construction site, where Henry and Jonah were now joined by several other townsfolk who had arrived to help. Rebecca felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that had nothing to do with buildings or land and everything to do with the man beside her. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Construction on Yates's house proceeded rapidly, with more and more townsfolk coming out to help as word spread of the water trust he had established. The trust had been announced at a town meeting where Judge Harmon had explained its implications. The mood had been one of celebration, with many smaller ranchers and farmers expressing gratitude to Yates for ensuring their access to water could never be monopolized. Theodore Whitcomb had not attended the meeting, but word reached him quickly enough. His response came in the form of a tersely worded letter delivered by his foreman. He was withdrawing his offer to purchase Holloway's land and would respect the water trust arrangement, provided certain accommodations were made for his larger cattle operation. He's backing down, Rebecca observed after reading the letter. On his terms, of course, but still he's acknowledging defeat, Yates nodded. For now, men like Whitcomb don't give up easily, but we've removed his main incentive and we've united the town against him. He's a businessman at heart. He knows when the cost outweighs the benefit. With the immediate threat from Whitcomb diminished, they were able to focus on completing the house before the first heavy snows. The new structure was similar to the original in size and layout, but improved in several ways: better insulation, larger windows, and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Throughout these busy weeks, Yates courted Rebecca with a quiet devotion that touched her deeply. There were no grand gestures or lavish gifts. Neither of them had the means or inclination for such things. Instead, there were small, meaningful moments. A wildflower tucked behind her ear as they worked side by side, a special place set for her at the communal meals, his hand finding hers in quiet moments. In the evenings, when others had returned to town, they would often sit together on what would become the front porch, talking long into the twilight. Rebecca learned about Yates's childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, his dreams for the ranch. He, in turn, listened as she shared stories of her life in Baltimore, her journey west, her hopes for the future. Their courtship was the talk of Bentonville, of course. In a small town, nothing remained private for long, but the gossip was good-natured and supportive. Most people seemed genuinely pleased to see two of their own finding happiness together. "You realize you've become quite the hero in town," Rebecca teased Yates one evening as they sat on the nearly completed porch. The rancher who stood up to Whitcomb and protected the community's water. Yates snorted softly. "Hardly a hero, just doing what made sense." "Because you suggested it," he reminded her. "You're the real hero of this story." Rebecca shook her head. "No, the hero is the man who didn't give up, who rebuilt from ashes, who had the courage to open his heart again after loss." She reached over and took his hand. "That's you, Yates Holloway." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "If I'm a hero, it's only because I had someone worth fighting for." The house was completed just as November gave way to December. On a clear, cold Saturday, a small crowd gathered for what they were calling a house-warming, a celebration of the completed structure and all that it represented. Ethel Clayton had organized a potluck feast. Tables were set up in the new main room, laden with dishes brought by seemingly every household in Bentonville. There was laughter, music, courtesy of Reverend Simmons's fiddle, and a general air of festivity. Late in the evening, as the celebration was winding down and people were beginning to depart, Yates drew Rebecca away from the crowd, leading her out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering like diamonds above them. Their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air. "It's beautiful," Rebecca remarked, looking up at the vast expanse of sky. "Yes, it is," Yates agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found he wasn't looking at the stars at all, but at her. He took her hands in his expression serious yet tender. "Rebecca," he began, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I lost my home, I thought I'd lost everything, but instead I found something far more precious." Rebecca's heart began to race as she realized what might be coming. "Yates, I love you," he continued. "More than I ever thought possible, and while this house is finally complete, my home won't be truly whole until you're in it." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that gleamed in the moonlight. "Rebecca Kincaid, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring was simple, a single small diamond set in a band of gold, but to Rebecca, it was more beautiful than the finest jewelry in any Baltimore shop window. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy brimming in her eyes. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you." His face broke into that rare, transformative smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words alone could not express. Inside, someone must have noticed their absence, for when they returned hand in hand, the remaining guests fell silent. Then Ethel Clayton, ever observant, spotted the ring on Rebecca's finger and let out a delighted exclamation. "Well, it's about time," she declared, raising her cup. "To Yates and Rebecca, to Yates and Rebecca." The others echoed, glasses and cups lifting in a joyful toast. As congratulations showered around them, Rebecca looked up at Yates, her heart full to bursting. From the ashes of destruction had risen not just a new house, but a new beginning, a love and a future brighter than either of them could have imagined. That fateful day when she had followed him from his burned house and told him, with a certainty she hadn't fully understood at the time, "You'll build again." They were married on Christmas Eve in the Bentonville church, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Rebecca wore a dress of ivory silk that she had made herself, with Martha Peterson and several other women helping with the more intricate details. Yates, looking somewhat uncomfortable but undeniably handsome in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with Jonah Williams standing proudly as his best man. As Reverend Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, Rebecca felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. The journey that had brought them to this moment had been unexpected and at times difficult, but every step had led them here, to this perfect union of hearts and lives. The reception was held at their home now, not just Yates's, the rooms filled with laughter, music, and the warm wishes of friends who had become like family. Even Sheriff Wilson attended, somewhat awkwardly offering his congratulations and a wedding gift of a fine silver serving tray that Rebecca suspected had been his wife's choice. Theodore Whitcomb was conspicuously absent, though he had sent a polite note and a substantial check that Yates and Rebecca promptly donated to the town's school building fund. It was a gesture that earned them even more goodwill in Bentonville, though as Yates pointed out, they hadn't done it for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Late that night, when the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, Yates built up the fire in the main room while Rebecca changed out of her wedding dress. When she returned, wearing a simple white nightgown under a warm robe, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of their ranch. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. He turned, drawing her into his arms. "About how different this Christmas is from what I expected when I watched my house burn, about how much I've gained when I thought I'd lost everything." His eyes, warm in the firelight, held hers. "About how very much I love my wife." "Wife," Rebecca repeated softly, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," he murmured, bending to kiss her. The kiss deepened, filled with the promise of the night ahead and all the nights to come. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Holloway," Yates whispered against her lips. "Merry Christmas, husband," she replied, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible to contain. As they moved toward their bedroom, the first night they would spend in the house they had built together, Rebecca knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. From the ashes of tragedy, they had built not just a house, but a home and a life filled with love, hope, and the promise of all the years to come. 5 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of their home, watching as Yates taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, named for Yates's first wife, a gesture that had moved Rebecca deeply, sat on her hip, clapping her small hands in delight at her brother's accomplishment. The ranch had prospered in the years since their marriage. The herd had grown, the land had been expanded through the purchase of an adjacent property, and the house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Bentonville, too, had flourished, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Theodore Whitcomb had eventually sold his holdings and moved east, unable to expand as he'd wished due to the water trust and the unity of the smaller ranchers it had fostered. His departure had changed the power dynamics of the region, allowing for more equitable development and cooperation among the remaining ranchers and farmers. "Mama, look at me," James called, sitting proudly astride the gentle pony as Yates led it in a circle. "I see you, darling." "You're doing wonderfully," Rebecca called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Yates glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that look still sent a thrill through her, the warmth, the love, the silent communication that passed between them with just a glance. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Yates took her hand, his thumb absently tracing the wedding band he'd placed there 5 years ago. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "When my old house burned." Rebecca nodded. "Sometimes. It was terrible for you, but—" She hesitated, then continued, "But I can't help being grateful for what came after." "So am I," he agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "If not for that fire, I might never have known how much I needed you. Might have gone on alone, thinking that was all there was for me. Instead, we built this," she said, gesturing to encompass not just the house, but all they had created together, the ranch, the family, the life they shared. "You told me I would," he reminded her with a smile. "That day when I was ready to walk away, you followed and said I'd build again." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You were right, as usual," Rebecca smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they sat together in the growing twilight. From the ashes of destruction, they had indeed built again not just structures of wood and stone, but a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. It was more than either of them had dared to dream when fate first brought them together on that fateful autumn day when a determined woman followed a defeated man and gave him back his hope. "I love you, Yates Holloway," she said softly. "And I love you, Rebecca Holloway," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their home warm and secure behind them, their future stretching out before them like a promise kept.